with me, Nailah Huda, and on AWANI Global this week, we want to look at recent developments in US-China relations, particularly following President Trump's meeting with China's Xi Jinping in South Korea. But apart from trade deals, what did get a lot of attention, particularly in the media, was President Trump's social media post describing it as a G2 meeting. This, of course, made headlines, particularly on what a G2 grouping actually entails and how or what the reception has been like towards this concept. So this hour today, we want to discuss what this actually entails and whether this optimism might translate into potentially a de-escalation in trade tensions and tariff wars, and how might governments in Southeast Asia react or read into this. And to help us unpack, we're joined today by Associate Professor Dr. Khoo Hooi, Department of International and Strategic Studies, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, University Malaya, and also joining us, Angeline Tan, analyst at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia, with a research covering East Asia's international relations with a focus on China. Thank you so much, Ying and Angeline, for joining us today on AWANI Global. Perhaps I'd like to start with Dr. Ying. Just some of your key takeaways looking at President Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping recently.
Yeah, well, if we look at the meeting of the both in South Korea recently, it's quite clear that both sides were trying to project calm after the years of tensions, and everybody was looking forward to see what they're going to discuss. I think the lighter part was with one being very chatty and another one was not. That was being captured by the media. And of course, it was very symbolic, the body language that we see and the rhetorics, and also, of course, the promises of the everlasting peace was quite significant as well. What does it really mean? But I think beneath the surface, as I observe, this was more of managing the rivalry between the two than really resolving it. I think there were some small wins that we see, such as the pause, the new tariffs, but I think the real structural issues, such as the advanced technology and so forth, remain kind of untouched.
Angeline, your thoughts, some of the key takeaways or highlights from this meeting?
Well, for me, there were no clear breakthroughs, but I think the fact that both of the presidents, President Xi and Trump, agreed to meet amidst such tensions in the US-China relationship, I think shows me a great commitment towards progress. I think Dr. Khoo was saying that there are still a lot of structural problems, but I think this is a hope for progress almost, and that there's no desire for further escalations. So for me, it was quite encouraging to see a thawing of relations, and hopefully the goal is to keep it in this direction.
I mean, as you said, perhaps no real or solid breakthrough, but if we look specifically at the trade agreement, do you think that, the sort of optimism, the sort of niceties that Ying Hui mentioned, is this reflected in the trade agreement? Was there a big win, perhaps, Ying Hui?
Well, to be honest, I think the optimism is more rhetorical than real, as we see, and you could almost feel like the Trump, as usual, to show his showmanship in it during the meetings, to project his confidence, and but it is not necessarily reflect the reality of the talks, I think, up to today. And I think it also, but of course, the meeting, it gives the market a bit of the breathing space, that I cannot deny it, and send a signal that, at least the both sides are still willing to talk, which is good in that sense. But the real problems are still there, as I earlier mentioned, and there was a lot of discussions about the rare earth as well, and so forth. So I will say, I will agree to Angeline as well, that this is not so much of a policy breakthrough, but the meetup was. And in short, I think it is more like a pause between the rounds, and with the real competitions quietly continues, as I see.
Of course, you mentioned a little bit about the market reaction, how it gave a little bit of a breathing space. Angeline, I think one thing that, of course, got a lot of reaction from the markets was President Trump's description of this meeting as a G2 meeting, something that we've not heard of in a while, something that was, sort of discussed or coined decades ago. But what do you think is behind this? What is the actual story behind this G2 concept?
I don't think there's much of a story. The concept of it is just that it's the two largest economies trying to discuss trade-related issues amongst themselves or trade-related issues that interest them. I think it's just come up again because President Trump just likes the idea of it, or maybe the
Mhm.
saying of it. It's not a term that I personally would use, but essentially it's just a fancy way of saying bilateral economic relations between the two largest economies.
So do you think it was perhaps an overreaction, what we've seen in the media among analysts, especially the sort of reaction that we're seeing? I mean, analysts, or at least some analysts, are saying that it could perhaps stir a little bit of concern or anxieties among other groupings. Do you think this is, or this has any basis, Angeline?
I wouldn't assume that this would stir anxiety because I'm not even sure it does exist. For it to exist, both parties would acknowledge it. And so far, it's really just President Trump that has been calling it a G2, as you've mentioned. I think what actually stirs anxiety, it's more the unpredictability of the US-China dynamic rather than the G2 format itself. So I think we should be very careful about whether or not this G2 actually even exists.
Ying Hooi, do you agree with this? Do you think that it's the unpredictability still that would remain and would remain, to be a source of anxieties for a lot of countries?
Well, I would think this is not new. Either Trump used the term of G2 or not. And as I see, he casually used it. But the tension between the two has been there for a long time as well. And I personally also do not I'm not comfortable to assert the usage of the G2 itself, especially with the current political developments around the world. So I think although it emerged again and some media was using the G2 as a term, but I will say that this both sides, as we see, also wanted different things. And on the Trump side, the US side, they wanted cooperation under certain terms. But I think the China side might see it a bit different as well as a recognition of parity. So the reviving of these terms can send a different message as well. That to assert the Washington and Beijing are two indispensable powers in the world right now, and the rest of the world should adapt to their relationship. And I see that can be a dangerous precedent to set.
Well, I mean, putting this G2 concept aside, just looking at the bilateral meeting, what came out of it, some of the trade agreements, and rhetorical or not, but just the rhetoric and the narrative surrounding it. How do you think ASEAN member states or governments in Southeast Asia might read into this, Angeline, just coming out of the 47th ASEAN summit? Of course, there's a lot of talk on how the ASEAN should sort of balance between these power rivalry. How do you think this might then change the dynamic, if even so?
Well, I don't think that ASEAN is necessarily concerned because regardless of what does happen out of these meetings, these talks, G2, if it exists, uh, ASEAN still holds a really indispensable place in this region. It is important to both China and US respectively for whatever their bilateral relationships are. I think it's important that we continue to, as a bloc, and also its individual member states, to meaningfully engage with both sides, both US and China, regardless of what the outcomes are in the trade talks.
Ying Hu, your thoughts on this? Do you think anything substantial came out of these bilateral meetings, these talks that might be a concern or even a factor of influence that could potentially change the dynamic in Southeast Asia or in ASEAN?
Well, I see now this is where it becomes very relevant for our regions, as you just now highlighted that we just concluded the 47th ASEAN summit, that ASEAN has received so much of the world attention right now. First, we must remember the US-China tension is not new, and Southeast Asia has lived with it for decades. But what's different now that I see is how both powers are consolidating influence through a smaller and issue-based alliances. So on the US side, we also see the visit of Trump's to Japan and later on South Korea, of course. But there's also mini-lateral initiatives such as like the Quad that we will have yet to see how it is moving to. But on the China side, I think they also doubling down on its own different network as well. So what we really witnessing now is, I think, is a fragmented form of multilateralism, where the both are building their coalition of convenience around themselves. And for Southeast Asia, I think this means the region has to continue its very long tradition of non-alignment and hedging, and that is what I see the ASEAN is continue to do. Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about how, it might be a lot of it is rhetorical, but it did somewhat give some breathing space to the markets. Do you think that this can translate into de-escalation in trade tensions and tariff wars in what we're seeing, and how might the impact be on Southeast Asia, Ying Hooi?
Yeah, well, I see that what the most ASEAN countries are doing now, especially countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, they don't want to pick sides. Although sometimes you tend to see that media played up that which side they are on. But I think what they're trying to project is strategic autonomy, staying open to all sides, but not to be dominated by anyone. So at the same time, we also increasingly see the region becoming more active in the South-South cooperation, and by putting themselves as a leader in the global South cooperation as well, engaging in the different forums like BRICS, non-alignment movement, and so forth in a more active manner compared to before. So I think it pushes the Southeast Asia to actually diversify its diplomatic approach as well.
Angeline, your thoughts on this? Can we expect a slight de-escalation in the tariff wars and trade tensions?
I think de-escalation is possible, but it's not really a given. And even if there is this de-escalation, I think we shouldn't take it for granted. If there's anything that the pandemic taught us, it's the importance of agility and also resilience. So I think that we should brace ourselves, and as Dr. Khoo was saying, exercise our strategic autonomy, hedge to the best of our bets, and make sure that we engage both meaningfully with both the US and China, because I do think that whatever comes out of the conclusions of the trade talks, there will be a determination on both sides to compete. And it really just depends on how well we navigate that.
I mean, it's not easy, I'm assuming, this act of balancing. And Ying Hooi, how do you think this might look like with Philippines as chair of ASEAN in the next year? You mentioned this need for, this long-term strategy of hedging. Do you think that the alliance might be a little bit, or the alignment might be a little bit clear with Philippines as chair of ASEAN next year?
Yeah, well, as we also know that whoever become the ASEAN chair might also shift the approach of ASEAN itself. So as traditionally, we see Philippines are more inclined towards the US because of the histories that they have shared. So it will be very interesting to see how Marcos Jr.'s is going to navigate around this US versus China's tension. And by taking over Malaysia, which is this year, arguably, is one of the years that has most of the incidents are actually happening, and it's still ongoing, and it's going to be dragged until the 2026. And it will be the test for ASEAN to see how they're going to assert ASEAN centrality, where the ASEAN leaders always use. And are they really doing it in the next year?
Angeline, what do you make of this? How do you think Philippines might do as chair of ASEAN in terms of balancing between these great powers?
There is an assumption that the Philippines is going to, act in a way that is maybe a bit more leaning towards the US. But what I hope is that at the end of the day, as chair of ASEAN, a bloc of now 11 countries, that they represent the interest of the entire region and the bloc, and not just their own agenda. So it's hard to say what they would end up doing, but that's my hope.
Yeah.
that they put ASEAN above all.
Yeah, if I may add, I think it's also very interesting to see how Philippines is going to navigate with the issues of South China Sea, where they call it West Philippine Sea as well, because I think the South China Sea issue has not been really being raised as much this year, but I can see that it will be most likely one of the focus next year.
I mean, you mentioned that, and I'm not sure if you're, if you've read into the details, but I believe there was a code of conduct that's been upgraded or somewhat escalated in the last 47th summit. Do you think that makes much difference in South China Sea and how Philippines might handle that, Ying Hui?
Yeah, well, this is a very prolonged issues with the South China Seas, and it has never been resolved. And the code of conduct has been there while they upgraded it, but still, I do not see how China is not going to assert their so-called claims onto this part of the areas as well. So I will still see that, and intertwined with this is the trade issues that we see. So I will see that it will become more complex despite of the code of conduct.
Ying Hui, I want to go back a little bit to what you said earlier about a potential option to I guess broaden their network with other global South allies, other frameworks or other multilateral frameworks like BRICS and whatnot. Do you think that this is still a strategic option given global power rivalry that should sustain or maintain and remain relevant for the years to come? Do you think that this is still a strategic option for ASEAN?
Yes, I see how the ASEAN and the other countries starting to actually strengthen the global South cooperation out of what happens around the world right now, especially looking at the US and China tension. And I see that in a positive lens that at least and hopefully this can make the negotiations between all these countries in a more equal manner by forging their own alliances against the major powers that can be more influential in the world.
Yeah, I do want to. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
If I could chime into that, I think this is the new way to go. I think it is very, very important to continue on this trend of diversifying our relationships. To add on to BRICS as an example, this year we had the inaugural ASEAN GCC China Summit, and I think that was, it's all about looking for creative ways of cooperation beyond traditional structures that we're already used to. It's about looking for new solutions. And while there is a lot of questions about the China factor in this ASEAN GCC format, I have heard that as well, that there are discussions of an ASEAN GCC US to kind of balance, to also expand cooperation. So I do think that cooperation between ASEAN and the Global South is a really, really interesting place to look at. And I'm hoping that, as we're working within this like Indo-Pacific framework, it's not just what is towards the west of us, but maybe we should also pay more attention into the Pacific Islands to be a bit more inclusive in the Indo-Pacific region.
I mean, ASEAN GCC US framework might be interesting, but if, for example, if we take the example of Malaysia and Indonesia, signaling this slight pivot to BRICS as an alternative, Ying Hui, do you think that this might, how do you think this might impact the relationship or the fragile relationship that we have with these great powers, particularly in anticipating a slightly negative reaction from the US, especially given now that tariffs are being used as this sort of tool in trying to get what President Trump wants from Southeast Asian countries?
I think this is especially how and what we witnessed during the 47th ASEAN Summit with all the grants welcoming and things like that. And I think ASEAN is trying really hard to actually navigate around this to show that they are not inclined to any of the power. Either towards the US or China. But of course, we cannot dismiss that if we split the ASEAN into the different member states, some of the member states have a different approach, and while the others can have a different approach depending on the foreign policy or the orientation as well.
I mean, we're talking about just relationships with U.S. and China and potentially new alliances or other strategic frameworks, multilateral frameworks like BRICS and other global South alliances. There's also some talk about this need to, I guess, rethink the global or multilateral order and how states navigate issues on the international stage. Do you think, I guess this is a more bigger picture question, but Angeline, do you think that there needs to be a sort of rethink of how member states navigate these issues and perhaps rethink the Western dominance in the international stage?
I think there should be a rethink, and I think Malaysia actually has been trying to put efforts into and energy into this rethink as well, right? The fact that we pushed for the trilateral of ASEAN, GCC, China, the fact that we are interested in BRICS. I think we have been, reaching out our hands into and trying to cooperate and engage with as many actors as possible, and trying new formats as well. So it's not just the thinking stage right now. I do think that Malaysia is trying to push for the doing stage.
Ying, do you agree? I guess this is a bigger picture question again, but do you think this is perhaps signaling to something bigger, that there's this distrust in multilateralism and multilateral frameworks internationally, or do you think it's just a matter of slightly smaller band-aid solutions might do?
Yeah, well, I think we cannot deny that there's certainly anxieties and fear coming from this framing of the so-called G2 or US versus China that could actually reduce multilateralism and bilateralism as we see right now. So when we look at the US and China, when they start making deals over certain issues, smaller and middle powers such as ASEAN, the worries is being sidelined. So, for instance, when it comes to the negotiations on trades or technology, so it can leave very little room for the others to be able to influence the outcome. Hence, then it goes back to nothing of how they are trying to navigate. So I think this challenge the whole principle for ASEAN centrality that we see, but that Southeast Asia might once again become an arena where the great powers compete rather than cooperate. Because what I see now is it is not new, but it just escalates. And we do not know when it is going to end. And basically, ASEAN is stuck within this sphere of the two powers trying to spread their influence. So I think that's why it's important for ASEAN to keep emphasizing multilateral mechanisms as well, and try to build the different alliances and diversify it.
I think one aspect that we haven't touched on is hypothetically, if we were to consider this sort of G2 framing, this I don't even know, bipolar framework of the world. Angeline, how do you think this might serve Beijing's own ambition, perhaps to be recognized as this peer global superpower?
Well, first, I wouldn't start with assuming to know what Beijing's ambitions are, but I don't believe that a G2 framework would serve Beijing's current approach, and they have been wary of adopting this terminology themselves. Beijing, they've been actively promoting themselves, positioning themselves as advocates of multilateralism. So adopting a G2 framework, which is essentially, as you mentioned, a bipolar framework, I don't think it goes against what Beijing claims it stands for, which is multilateralism. So I'm not sure that this G2 framework would serve their interests, and I'm not sure this G2 framework would actually be actualized.
We are coming towards the end, but I do just want to get your thoughts quickly on another thing that also came up during the talks, or at least one of the meetings in South Korea with China. There's not a lot of mention about internal issues, but China did call for the US to avoid crossing 4 sensitive red lines to keep the two countries' relations on track. This was following, of course, meeting between the two leaders. But these 4 red lines were, of course, Taiwan, democracy and human rights, the political path and system, and right to development. Angeline, just some final thoughts. Do you think that this is of any interest to President Trump, or do you think that he's sort of signaled that he's staying away from these issues?
These 4 red lines are not new. They're not new to China. They're not new to this relationship. But I think maybe what is not necessarily new, but fresh maybe, is China's ability to articulate this even clearer. And my takeaway from the meeting is that not only is this a commitment towards progress, as I mentioned earlier, but I do see that both sides are gaining a clearer idea of each other's red lines. And it's just a matter of whether both sides want to comply and, show the gesture of goodwill to actually keep within the red lines. I think the message is clear.
Ying, Hooi, maybe you have some thoughts on this as well?
Well, just a very quick one. I think we should not also forget the Gaza crisis as well. They have sent different signals to the world that, there is a very blurred line between democracy and human rights nowadays. Who is actually championing democracy and who is actually championing human rights? Because it can come from both sides. Hence, it becomes a test for the world, really, to look at all these so-called red lines of either from the China side or from the United States side as well. So I think this will be something that is very interesting for us to see. And of course, the least that I want to see is the world is being managed by the two and the bipolarity as we see during the Cold War. And it has to come from many different powers, big and small, sharing responsibility for it.
A very interesting point to end on, and perhaps we can save that for another show. Plenty more we can unpack there for sure. Thank you so much. That's Associate Professor Dr. Khoo Hooi from University Malaya and Angeline Tan from ISIS Malaysia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That is all on Awani Global this week with me, Nailah Huda. We'll catch you another time.